Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So since I had a day off today, I thought I'd shoot part 2 of this video series on increasing your study productivity. So today we'll talk about active recall and how you can use it in your study. So in case you missed part 1 of the series, make sure to check that video out because you'll find that very useful and it'll help sort of put this video into perspective. There we talked about getting your mind, body, and environment ready for learning, and we also talked about the Pomodoro technique for increasing your study productivity. So today, let's get into discussing active recall and how it can be used in your studies. So active recall essentially means testing your knowledge and understanding of a topic. It's essentially an efficient way to move information from your short-term memory into your long-term memory so that you can easily draw on it again when you need it most, such as during a test or an exam. So before we talk about active recall, let's talk about what most students currently do when they study. And I'll be honest, I'm totally guilty of this too. So what we generally tend to do when we're studying now is to reread passages of books. Then we take notes from textbooks and reread these notes, and then highlight specific words or sentences in the notes with the intent of going back and rereading those highlights. So it's mostly repetitive rereading. So does this sound like something you would be doing? Well, this seems useful, and don't get me wrong, I used to do this all the time as well, but what I later found out is that this is a very passive form of study. So let me explain. There have been plenty of studies that have shown that passive repetitive rereading produces little benefit for learning information, despite us thinking that it does. Yet this is probably the number one form of studying that many students actually choose to do. So rereading and summarizing notes sends information in a one-way path into your brain. If you haven't practiced recalling that information, it eventually gets lost in the recesses of your brain. So now let's talk about active recall and why it actually works better than passive studying. Active recall or retrieval is the practice of moving information out of your brain. Now, the very act of thinking deeply and retrieving information stored in your brain strengthens the neuronal connections so that the next time you look for information in your brain, such as during a test or an exam, then it's actually easier to find it. In fact, studies have actually shown that the harder you work to take information out of your brain, the stronger the neuronal connections are that form. So one of the most quoted scientific studies that supports the effectiveness of active recall is titled The Critical Importance of Retrieval for Learning, and this study was conducted by Jeffrey Karpik. The results were published in Science magazine in February 2008. Now, to summarize the results, students who used active recall were able to remember about 80% of new terms compared to 34% for the control group who passively studied by rereading their notes. The researchers concluded that the process of repeated testing or active recall rather than repeated reading or passive methods was a decisive factor for promoting correct recall from the student's long-term memory. They also mentioned that by using interactive methods such as short quizzes and memory testing, information can be transferred from short-term memory into long-term memory. Now, if you want to read the actual full study, I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. The analogy I like to think of is weight training at the gym. If we lift a set of light weights, we don't really feel the burn, as gym sharks would say. Now, the way muscles actually get built up is by using a heavier weight and literally microscopically tearing the fibers so that when they heal themselves, they grow back larger. Now, the same thing is true with studying. If you don't feel the burn, we aren't progressing as effectively as we could be. So how can we use active recall in our own studies? Now, the key to using active recall for effective study is by making the distinction between review and recall. Step 1 is to review your material. This is an important step prior to using active recall. Now, you can't practice remembering something unless you actually know it and understand it well enough to remember it. So reviewing is the first step to using active recall. Step 2 is active recall. This is the step where you focus on remembering without using any additional notes or tools, drawing only on your memory. It's also where many of us struggle the most because we don't actually have practice drawing information out of our brain. Now, during this step, if you can't remember something without searching for clues or looking it up, then you aren't actually using active recall. You need to go back to step 1 and review the material. This distinction between review and recall separates success and failure. Only when you separate review and recall are you calling on your memory to remember what you've previously learned and stored somewhere in your brain. One of the ways I used active recall was to create questions for myself during the review step. While reading lecture notes or class notes, I would think up of questions and put them into an app called Anki. Now, Anki is a flashcard app available for PC or Mac. You write a question on the flashcard and fill in your answer. Then later, when you go to the active recall step, Anki presents you with a question and you have to attempt to answer this question. If you get the question right, you mark it as correct and the question gets buried away and that question won't be presented to you for some time. Now, if you get the answer wrong, you mark it as incorrect and Anki will present that question to you sooner in your revision. I'll create a video about Anki sometime soon in the future. Now, repeatedly asking yourself a question, then challenging your brain to retrieve the answer is what will move information from short-term to long-term memory. The second way I used to use active recall in my exam prep was to teach what I was learning to someone else in the simplest way possible. This technique is actually called the Feynman Technique, and it's named after the scientist Richard Feynman. In addition to Richard Feynman being a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Feynman was also known for being a great teacher and being able to explain complex topics in very simple language. The key about the Feynman technique is to explain topics in very simple language. When you explain the topic either to yourself or someone else, you should identify any areas of the topic that you're unclear about and go back and review that section. The idea is to try and explain the topic to someone who has absolutely no idea of what the subject is. You can use this technique on your own, where you write the explanation out to yourself on a piece of paper, or you can use this technique within a study group, where you explain complex topics to each other in the simplest way possible. So that's what active recall is all about. Simply put, it's one of the best and proven ways to move information from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. Give it a try and you may be pleasantly surprised with some of the results. Now, if you found this video useful, please make sure to give it a like. If the topics and vibe of this channel resonates with your interests, then please consider subscribing. In our next session, I'll be talking about a technique that combines well with active recall to further enhance your studying game. Please be sure to tune in. I'll see you guys next time.